Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
In the headlines this Wednesday, February 3rd, Pope Francis urges everyone to promote human fraternity and highlights the importance of liturgy in the life of Christian prayer. The bishops of England and Wales call for an end to atrocities and violence against civilians in Ethiopia's Tigray region, and U.S. bishops launch a special collection to assist Catholics in Kyrgyzstan who suffered for decades under Soviet rule. In the Vatican, I'm Devin Watkins. As the world gears up to celebrate the first International Day of Human Fraternity on Thursday, Pope Francis appealed for everyone to engage in dialogue with those of other religions. He said everyone can practice human fraternity every day of the year. Also on Wednesday, the winners of this year's Zayed Award for Human Fraternity were announced. Sister Bernadette Reese reports.
On Wednesday morning after his general audience, Pope Francis reminded everyone that Thursday, February 4th, the first International Day of Human Fraternity will be celebrated. This celebration is intimately linked with the historic signing of the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. The signers of this document, Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, spent more than a year drafting it prior to signing it in Abu Dhabi on the 4th of February 2019. It was not long until the Higher Committee for implementing the content of the document on human fraternity brought a message from the Pope and the Grand Imam to United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Through the committee, these two leaders proposed an annual day dedicated to human fraternity. That was the end of 2019. A year later, the UN declared February 4th the International Day of Human Fraternity. Now, 2 years after that milestone in the history of humanity, and for years to come, human fraternity will be celebrated internationally. The Pope, too, announced his pleasure that the nations of the entire world are joining in this celebration aimed at promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue. Later on Wednesday, it was revealed that the Pope and the Grand Imam will confer the Zayed Award on this year's winners, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Latifa Ibn Ziyaten, founder of Imad Association for Youth and Peace. Both of this year's Zayed Award recipients incarnate the ideal of human fraternity and social friendship, summed up in Pope Francis's latest encyclical. Joining Pope Francis in calling for a global ceasefire was UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And Latifa Ibn Ziyaten, after losing her son to an act of terrorism, transformed her sorrow into reaching out to young people. Her hope is to contribute to preserving social harmony between the older and younger generations and among both persons native to France and migrants. I'm Sister Bernadette Reese.
At this morning's general audience, Pope Francis continued his catechesis on Christian prayer, reflecting on the importance of liturgy and how liturgical prayer unites us to Christ. Thaddeus Jones has the story.
Speaking from the library of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Francis held his Wednesday general audience, which was live-streamed to the faithful around the world. In his continuing catechesis on Christian prayer, the Pope spoke about how the Church's liturgical celebrations make Christ present in our lives. He began by noting that Christian history is rife with movements which pushed liturgical rites aside in favor of a supposed purity of the spiritual experience. Many modern Catholics, he pointed out, attend Mass on Sunday but feed their own spirituality through various personal devotions. Pope Francis went on to say that the Church has made much progress in recent decades regarding the centrality of the liturgy in the life of faith.
La preghiera dei cristiani passa attraverso mediazioni concrete.
Christian prayer, he said, is closely linked to concrete expressions of faith, such as sacred scripture, the sacraments, and liturgical rites. Pope Francis said prayer is what allows us to interiorize Jesus' sacramental presence.
Ciò che è esterno a noi diventa parte di noi.
What is external to us becomes part of us, a reality expressed in the natural action of eating. He went on to say Mass cannot simply be listened to, but is always celebrated by all Christians who experience it. The Pope concluded his catechesis noting that Christ is the center of the liturgy and that every Christian is invited to participate wholeheartedly in the sacraments.
La vita è chiamata a diventare culto a Dio.
Life is called to become worship to God, he said, but this cannot happen without prayer, especially liturgical prayer.
Thanks there to Thaddeus Jones. In other news, the bishops of England and Wales are calling on the UK government to make urgently needed steps to assist people suffering the violence rocking in Ethiopia's Tigray region. As Lydia O'Kane reports, the lead bishop for Africa launched the appeal for greater involvement in peace and humanitarian efforts.
The humanitarian situation in Ethiopia's Tigray region continues to deteriorate following fighting which broke out between Tigray's regional government and Ethiopia's federal government in November last year. Over 1 million people are thought to have been displaced, and agencies working on the ground are warning of mass starvation. The current crisis has led the bishops of England and Wales to add their voice to the growing alarm. Bishop Paul Swarbrick, the lead bishop for Africa, has called on the UK government to step up its assistance for people affected by the violence in Ethiopia's Tigray region and its involvement in peace efforts. In a letter on Tuesday to the Minister for Africa, Bishop Swarbrick expressed his solidarity with the local church in Ethiopia and warned atrocities are being committed with no peace in sight. We are particularly concerned by the reports of widespread sexual violence, and there is an urgent need to ensure protection of vulnerable groups, especially women and girls, he said. The bishops have been receiving reports of people dying every day from a lack of food, water, medicine and other essentials. This situation, said Bishop Swarbrick, is being compounded by barriers preventing humanitarian agencies reaching those who have fled the fighting. In calling for urgent action, the Bishop for Africa implored the government to redouble the UK's assistance to those affected and diplomatic support for peace initiatives. I hope that you may also reiterate the paramount importance of every side in the conflict, along with neighbouring countries, respecting international law, including around the safe accommodation of refugees, he said. I'm Lydia O'Kane.
In Russia, nearly 1,400 protesters were arrested during Tuesday's demonstrations in support of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Stefan Bass has more.
Russian riot police using violence against supporters of the country's prominent Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Security forces were filmed beating demonstrators with batons. Nearly 1,500 people were reportedly detained since Tuesday in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Earlier, protesters were taken into custody outside the Moscow city court. These people are furious that Russian opposition leader Navalny was jailed. As he looked on through the window of his cage in the courtroom, the court sentenced him to 3.5 years imprisonment. About a year he spent under house arrest will be counted as time served. As the verdict was read, Navalny smiled and pointed to his wife Yulia in the courtroom. He traced the outline of a heart with his hands on the glass cage. Everything will be fine, he told her, as guards led him away. But the sentence came as a significant setback for his supporters. In January, Navalny returned to Russia after being treated in Germany for a near-fatal nerve agent attack last August. For Vatican News, I am Stefan Bos, reporting.
Police in Myanmar have filed charges against Aung San Suu Kyi for illegally importing communications equipment just 2 days after the military seized power in a coup. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate will be detained until February 15th for investigations. Police said illegally imported walkie-talkies were found in her home after her arrest on Monday. Charges were also filed against ousted President Win Myint for violating protocols to stop the spread of coronavirus during campaigning for an election last November. Elsewhere, money sent back home by Mexican migrants surged during 2020 despite the worldwide impact of the pandemic. As James Blears reports, remittances are needed more than ever as Mexico's economy has slumped under the weight of COVID-19.
Remittances, or money sent home by Mexican migrants who are living and working in the United States, increased by 11.4% during 2020, says the Mexican Central Bank. It adds up to a record $40.6 billion. That's more than Mexican oil exports or the entirety of Mexican tourism. It's only exceeded by manufacturing exports. To an economy whose GDP, or gross domestic product, shrank more than 10% over the same time span into a tailspin. It's a veritable lifeline. More than 98% of these remittances come from migrants in the United States via wire and bank transfers. That they've significantly increased the sum in spite of overall spiking unemployment is nothing short of remarkable. And the value of all of this is boosted back home because the peso's already slumped in value against the US dollar at the beginning of this year. It's estimated that 10% of the Mexican population lives and works north of the border, an economy within an economy feeding another economy at the worst of times during the most catastrophic pandemic in more than 100 years. For Vatican News, James Bliss reporting.
Briefly, Lebanon's poorest city, Tripoli, was again racked by protests last week, and some politicians and experts are warning that unrest could spread if more is not done to support people facing deepening poverty and coronavirus restrictions. The country was already in financial meltdown before the pandemic struck, with national debt spiraling, unemployment high, and tumbling currency stoking inflation. And finally, the bishops of the United States have announced that all parishes will take up a special collection on Ash Wednesday. The funds raised will go toward helping Catholics in Central and Eastern Europe as they seek to rebuild the church after decades of religious persecution under communist rule. The collection is meant to bring a concrete gesture of hope to Kyrgyzstan, as Father Benedict Mayaki reports.
The U.S. Bishops' Conference Subcommittee on Aid to the Church in Central and Eastern Europe is highlighting the Catholic community in Kyrgyzstan in its collection campaign slated for Ash Wednesday, 17th of February. Kyrgyzstan, the bishop said in a statement on Monday, is often compared to Switzerland for its beauty and to Siberia for its history as a Soviet gulag. Inadvertently, the Catholic Church was revived in the country when it was used as a prison for ethnic Poles and Germans deported from Western Russia for refusing to denounce their faith during the communist regime. The bishops noted that since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, countries in Central and Eastern Europe have been working to rebuild their religious life as well as government structures, social welfare activities and economies. More so, Catholics of that region, who have endured decades of anti-religious persecution under Soviet rule, are in urgent need. The bishops explained that the collection will support seminaries, youth ministry, social service programs and pastoral centers, as well as church construction and renovation in 28 countries that were once under communist control. Bishop Jeffrey Monfortin, president of the U.S. Bishops' Subcommittee for Aid to the Church in Central and Eastern Europe, recounts that during his visit to Kyrgyzstan in 2019, he was moved and humbled by the fervor of the people, including the young people who filled the churches. He recalled that one of the most moving experiences of his ministry was to confirm an elderly woman in a nursing home. He said that she had been baptized as an infant, but her parents were afraid to allow her confirmation, and for many years she had prayed to receive the sacrament. Encouraging support for the collection campaign, Bishop Monfortin explained that the generosity of the faithful will impact the lives of many in Central and Eastern Europe. Last year, the U.S. Bishops' Subcommittee for Aid to the Church in Central and Eastern Europe awarded $6.1 million in funding for 322 projects in 25 countries. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. For more on these and other stories, go to our web portal at www.vaticannews.va. There you can also find all our broadcasts in podcast form. And don't forget to catch the latest updates on our Facebook page and Twitter feed. In the Vatican, I'm Devin Watkins.